What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're back on the 1000 SP yet again. It's one of those things where when you're working on numerous projects at the same time, you're constantly waiting on parts. So each car, in this case more than two cars, end up in the lift bay one right after another. So there's been a lot of Corvair content lately. Was really hoping to have a little bit of steam on the white car, but the motor being seized in that may have been a blessing in disguise for now, only because we've gotten the chop top to the point where I can drive it. It's not obnoxiously loud, which you saw in the last episode. But now I can really keep focusing on the 1000 SP and not let my ADD get away from me, because it's very real and ever present. And if you're like me, you just can't stay focused on a project. But we just took the Corvair down to Caffeine and Octane in Atlanta, Georgia. It was awesome to finally get down there and see that Cars and Coffee event. It is massive. So lots to do on that car yet. So many plans, so many ideas, so much maintenance, all of that. But I want to drive this car. We haven't driven it, and it's really been crazy to see it come together. I still can't believe it's able to be one car, roll, steer, and air up and down. It's just going that far is really quite a feat. We've heard the Type 3 motor run and have not driven the car yet. So it's gone from a roller factory 1000 SP that hadn't run in decades, I've never heard it run, to literally a bare body, gut right out, plasma cut everything out the bottom of this thing, put it down over the Beetle pan after we shortened it and all that. And now it's like becoming a car again. So for the last 2 years, this thing's just been a body on dollies here in the shop. So I'm really trying not to be too hard on myself for the pace of progress on this car. I am just one guy and I am self-employed. So I'm constantly working on my laser machine, trying to keep jobs in and fund this whole hobby that has now gotten away from me, because we've gone from one project car over the last, however long I've been doing this, to now we have like 5 project cars, including a bus and a cab over, which are back home in New Hampshire. But in this episode, we are finally going lower with the 1000 SP. We're gonna cut those sills out a little bit more. It's something I've been talking about doing with this car this whole time on this project, on the channel, and that is ultimately why we put the EvaResto engine and trans cradle riser in this car the last time you saw this thing on the channel. We've now got the motor and transmission sitting even more than an inch up in the back here where the motor is. That has alleviated the negative camber when it's aired out, which means when I drive it super low, we're not gonna have a ton of that early Beetle swing arm rear camber. It just drives me nuts. But this is what we're doing today. Now that we have the cradle riser in there, the exhaust is no longer touching the floor when we're aired out, which it was before, at the same time that the sills were touching the floor without the pinch welds. So we've already cut the pinch welds out. We've got those laying flat on the concrete. And now that the exhaust is up off the ground, we can take even more out of this sill. And the reason why I'm doing that sill is super beefy, right? And even has like a primary and secondary section to the sill. It's a real beefy rocker panel. And back here, we're way up off the ground still, right? So that rear fender, valence, bumper. The front is also the same story, right? So we've got touching the floor here, and we're up off the ground there. But we are going to try to make it look a little bit more matching. So when that thing airs down, those bumpers are just a little bit closer to the ground. So the plan is to go to that guy right there. Is to go to our jack points. The top of this jack point is ultimately going to be where we put the ground now. That'll be the bottom of the sill. So we're not going to go to this line here and make it look too crazy. We're going to go to those jack points. Now, I am completely aware that hardly anyone else will know that this much work went into this car to get the front and rear bumpers just another 3/4 of an inch closer to the ground. So what I want to do before we get this thing in the air and before we start cutting any of the sills out is we're going to take some measurements. Now, I always forget to do this. So as you can see, the rocker panel is flat out on the floor, and we are roughly 7.5 inches to the top of the rear arch. Remember that measurement, 7.5 to the top of the rear wheel arch. We are 4.25 inches to this body line in the center of the bumper. Front wheel arch at about 12 o'clock, 16.25 inches. And the front bumper is 4.25. We're exactly the same front and rear bumpers. All right, so here's what we're looking at from underneath. This is the main part of the rocker that the car is currently sitting on when it airs down. This is our new frame rail. We welded in on the top and bottom, basically taking place of a box tube that was already here, right? But it was all rotted out, so we replaced it. And this is the sill that's hanging down. And this is where we're ultimately gonna go to. The floor of this notch is what's ultimately gonna be the bottom of our rocker panel. Okay, so next morning, made another run out to the steel yard because I kind of changed the design plan. And I have some 1/8 inch thick, 2-inch angle that I'm gonna utilize on this project. Okay, so I've spent a bit of time kind of carefully cutting away all of this, just a tentative line, kind of looking at how much drop I wanted. Because when the car airs down right now, we're sitting on the bottom of this. So my plan is to put the angle iron on top of that and measure down from our new frame rail so we have continuity from the front to back. So I cut another piece of angle iron, just a couple inches long, to kind of fit up in here to figure out how I wanted to do it. So I'm thinking of putting it up inside. Now, ultimately, we're gonna cut a lot more of this away, so it'll be easier to get it up in there when it's one piece. But for now, for a visual, slide it over that overlap, right? So that's exactly what I'm thinking now. We don't take any more than this, right? And then we'll drill a bunch of holes in the side of that, all the way down, all the way up, to ultimately plug weld to our angle iron that's now up on the inside of the frame rail. All right, got the passenger side done. As far as the rocker panel cut away, this side was much worse than the driver's side. It's just been hit and it's all out of form and a lot more rust under here, so there wasn't as much to cut out. You can see how just real rusty it was. It had accumulated water at some point, and yeah, it's just kind of all misshapen already. Since the lift arms are in the way, there's nowhere else for them to go. This is as out of the way the lift arms can get. While being able to stand under here, I'm gonna cut as much as I have access to on both sides. And then we'll bring the car down and we'll set it on the alignment stands that I made back a few months ago. And then I'll be able to gain access to the areas I can't get to right now with the lift arms in the way. All right, guys, well, we got the majority of what was left of what the car was sitting on out. And all that's left is, you can see where I had to stop because of the lift arm. But we got almost the entire way. There's some support up in here at the front, kind of where the A-pillar and door jamb come down. So we're gonna have to get in there and modify that a little bit. But got all this opened up. This was the real rusty side. It's all kind of bent up and tender. So what I'll do now is I'll bring the car down and we'll get it set down on all four wheels on the alignment stands, or the car stands, whatever you want to call them. I think we're taking 3/4 of an inch out, ultimately. All right, we got the 1000 SP up on the stands. I'm really glad I made these things, or took the time to build these things. I don't use them as often as I would like, but I just love having them around the shop. All right, so I have the first piece of angle iron cut. This is gonna go on the passenger side, and I've been making some alterations to it. Since up inside those sills at the bottom of the A and B pillar, or front and rear door jambs essentially, are some structured gussets that come all the way down. And since I don't really wanna cut those out, I wanna keep as much structure in there as possible, I'm notching the angle iron so we can get it up in under the sills, which is proving quite tight and difficult. Okay guys, I have been in and out from under this thing so many times on and off camera today, but I've drilled all of my plug weld holes and cleaned up around all of them. So sooner than later, once I get this thing fit for the final time, we'll actually start welding. What I've had to do off camera is I've had to angle cut this end. So you probably won't be able to tell on camera, but down here is the full 2-inch width of the angle, 2 by 2 inch. And then down here, I've angled it in. Down here is only about 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches at most. So what I didn't realize was this factory channel width gets narrower at the back of the car. And I didn't realize that until I got under here and started trying to fit this thing. So now that I've got this angled, I've got it pretty tight here, and we're stopping here because of that brace up in there. I'll make a piece that'll go to the back here that's even narrower, and at the front as well. So we've got a piece up in here that you can't quite see because of the light, and then this piece here. All right guys, well I have our first 2 main pieces welded in. I might still make a handful more stitch welds all the way down, but we've plug welded them all in. So this thing is in, it is not coming out. I double checked all my measurements and wanted to make sure that the bottom of this angle iron stayed consistent from the bottom of our frame rail. And I added in the small piece. I'd already contour cut to go around that bracing that's up in there. Welded the bottom, kind of cleaned it up and smoothed it out simply for when we roll the actual sill down over. And so from here, all I gotta do is make this front piece and this back piece. And for that, I'll obviously take it off the lift, I just wanted it on the lift so I could stand upright to do all of this. Yeah, well, this is awesome. This is our first step in. Really excited to see what this looks like when it's all folded over and it's aired down on the ground. While it's on the lift, we'll work on the center section over here on this side. We'll cut a middle section like we did on the other side, and you can see some of the bracing up in there. We'll probably go to this bracing like we did on the other side with one piece, and then work on the front separately. All right, so I'm working on the passenger side rear section, and as you guys saw before, it has this notch for a brace that's up in the middle of the sill, the bottom of the B-pillar. But what I did just now is I made my angle cut for how narrow that sill gets. I've got it back down on the alignment stands so I can get to those front and rear parts of the sill without the lift arms in the way. So let's crawl underneath and we'll see if this thing is cut well enough to tack weld in and get ready to plug weld in. All right, guys, I think we have all the welding done. Got all the plug welds welded, a lot of sections along the edge all welded, and I ground everything down too. I didn't bother filming all of the grinding. I just took one of the angle grinders with a flap wheel on it and just ground all the edge welds flat, as well as our seams between the pieces. Simply so we have a flat bottom that we can roll this over onto. I'm going to try to seal everything up as best as possible by the time we're driving this car. Like all of the seams, wherever we've welded or cut, we're going to seal everything up ultimately. All along the floor extensions, you know, we'll seal everything. All right, I've got the sills hammered down and over. I put a lot of heat to it, tried to fold as much over by hand first and then used the body hammer. It's pretty crazy to see how small this sill is now. And, you know, and honestly, it's a little bit more comparable to the size of the sill above it that's under the door. I want to put it back down on the stands to just get some of the parts above the lift arms hammered up just a little bit better. But we are close to setting this on the ground. Ultimately, at some point, I'm gonna seal the underside, maybe panel bond, I don't know with what yet. If you've got any recommendations, leave it in the comments below. But at some point, I'll end up sealing the bottom where it's overlapped. It's going to touch the ground, so it might wear off. I might even entertain the idea of grinding the paint away where it's not super rusty and actually stitch welding it and kind of making it one piece. I don't know. I'll paint everything off camera because the car is not hitting the road yet and there's plenty more paint work I have to do where we've welded and done a bunch of other cutting. All right, guys, we're off the lift. Everything's swept up and I am already so stoked on this because we still have that 2-tier sill. I don't feel like we took too much to make the car look silly, which obviously was a concern of not just mine, but a lot of you guys have expressed concern too. And I first started talking about this, really didn't want it to look too crazy by removing too much sill. And I don't think we did that at all, even at ride height or just aired up in general. We still have that step in the sill. Yeah, I am loving the fact that that does not look bad. Man, it's crazy to think that we've got a solid 3/4 of an inch, 7/8 of an inch, almost a full inch worth of that sill taken out of there. So let's finally do what this whole episode is based on. Let's air this thing down now that we can go another almost inch lower. Oh my gosh. Oh man. I can't even believe that. All right, I honestly can't even believe it standing here with this car in this bay, laying on the new rockers, flat on the pavement. Look at how much we're talking in the front now. Holy cow. And even with that extra inch we just went or so, you can tell how much farther the wheel is going inside that wheel well too, with that Beetle front end. I can't even believe this. We have just stuffed that rear wheel into that wheel well. On the pavement. Man, guys, that right there is what we were going for. Stuffed. I love it. Oh, I'm so stoked. So stoked on this. It was so much work to get just another fraction of an inch lower, but that fraction of an inch just made all the difference on the car, especially in person. You really can't grasp how low this car is until you see it in person. We're looking down on the roof. I'm only 5'8". This is mental. Unreal. Another main reason why I only took the amount I did out of that sill to basically the bottom of that factory jack point is because of our overhead height with our rear tires. We are just about out of room with 15s. And this is a 165/50 15. And we are literally almost to the top of our brace for the back window in this car. So this could not have worked out any better. To take almost an inch out of the bottom of those sills and drop this thing down that much more was kind of calculated because of the amount of space we had on top of our tires too. So real stoked that we've got that height Still lots of interior work to do yet, but we aren't hung up on the tires. We are indeed laid flat out on the floor with our new height. So excited about that. Well guys, it's hard to convey just how low this car is through video. It's really quite, it's mind-boggling. The shock value is still there for me. It's just insane to see this thing this low, sitting on the floor. There's still some things to finish up underneath as far as sealing and bonding and paint and all that, but for now we are sitting on the new height of our sills. Bumpers, 3.5. And what, we were 4 1/4 to the bumper at the beginning of the video. So 3.5 inches. And for our front bumper, 3.5. Well guys, it looks like we got the 3/4 of an inch I was hoping to get this whole time. I'm super happy with where the car is sitting now. I'm not gonna cut more out of the car to continue to go lower. This was just on the docket from the very beginning, so I'm stoked that I finally got it done. It was a bunch of work, but here we are at our new aired out height. Just so stoked on this car. Well guys, that's gonna do it for this episode. I really appreciate you watching. I'm real happy that we finally got this done on the car. I'm really happy with how it looks. Lots more to do. We still need to work on driveline, pedal cluster and all that in order to drive this thing. We still need to wire it, firewall work, sheet metal work, tons of stuff. So stay tuned for much more content on this car. I'm really hoping to drive it this fall. We got plenty of wind in our sails on this project, so please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Hit the like button, hit the notification bell. It all helps the channel grow in a massive way, so I really appreciate all of you guys' support. We'll see you in the next episode.